Dean Martin once fired his best friend on live television, not because he hated him, but because he loved him. And that decision destroyed them both. It's a story about the cost of doing the right thing. It's about a friendship that couldn't survive professionalism. And it's about a decision that haunted Dean Martin for the rest of his life. The year was 1968. The Dean Martin Show was at the height of its success. Top-rated variety show on television. Dean was America's favorite entertainer. Effortless cool, perfect timing, a show that made everything look easy. Behind that ease was a team of writers, producers, and crew who worked tirelessly to make Dean look good. And at the center of that team was a man named Tommy Rivers. Tommy had been Dean's head comedy writer for 8 years, but more than that, he'd been Dean's friend for nearly 20 years. They'd met in the early days when Dean was still working nightclubs with Jerry Lewis. Tommy had written material for them then. When Dean went solo, Tommy came with him. When Dean got his TV show, Tommy was the first person he hired. They weren't just colleagues, they were brothers. Tommy had been at Dean's house for Christmas, had held Dean's kids when they were babies, had sat with Dean through his divorce, through career struggles, through the deaths of friends. They'd shared bottles of whiskey and secrets and the kind of trust that only comes from decades of friendship. And now Dean was going to fire him. The decision had been building for months. Tommy was struggling. His marriage had fallen apart. He'd started drinking, not socially, but seriously. The kind of drinking that meant showing up late, missing deadlines, turning in work that wasn't up to standard. At first, Dean covered for him, made excuses to the network, rewrote sketches himself when Tommy couldn't deliver, paid Tommy's salary even when he wasn't producing, because that's what friends do. You don't abandon someone when they're struggling. But it had gotten worse. Tommy would disappear for days. The writing quality had declined so much that other writers were complaining. The show was suffering, and NBC was starting to ask questions. Dean had tried everything. Talked to Tommy, offered to pay for treatment, threatened, begged. Nothing worked. Tommy would promise to do better, and for a week or two he would. Then he'd slip again. And finally, Dean had to make a choice. Keep protecting his friend and watch his show, his career, his livelihood, the jobs of dozens of other people suffer, or do what needed to be done. He chose the show. It was a Tuesday, taping day for that week's episode. Tommy wasn't there, hadn't shown up for 3 days, hadn't called. Dean had tried reaching him but got no answer. Dean made the decision that morning, told his producer to find Tommy, get him to the studio. Dean needed to do this in person. Tommy showed up around 3 in the afternoon, an hour before taping. He looked terrible, unshaven, rumpled, eyes red. But he was there. Dean pulled him aside, backstage, near the dressing rooms, away from most of the crew, but not completely private. "Tommy," Dean said, "we need to talk." Tommy knew. You could see it in his face. "Dean, I'm sorry I'm letting you go," Dean said quickly, like ripping off a bandage. "Effective immediately. I'll pay you through the end of the month, and I'll give you a recommendation letter for whatever you want to do next. But you can't work here anymore." Tommy stared at him. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then, "Dean, please, I'll fix it. I'll get better. Just give me another chance." "I've given you a dozen chances," Dean said. His voice was steady but quiet. "And you keep breaking them, Tommy. I can't keep doing this. The show is suffering, the crew is suffering, and honestly, watching you destroy yourself is killing me. But I can't save you. You have to save yourself. And you can't do that while you're working here. So you're just done with me?" "I'm done enabling you," Dean said. "I'm not done caring about you. But I can't let you take this show down with you." Tommy's face hardened.
After everything I've done for you, I know what you've done for me, and I'm grateful, but that doesn't mean I can keep doing this." They stood there in tense silence. Then Tommy nodded slowly. "Fine, I'll go." "Tommy." "No, Dean, you've made your decision. I'll respect it." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I'll clean out my office." "You don't have to do it today." "Yes, I do." Tommy turned and walked away. Dean stood there, watching him go. His chest felt tight. His hands were shaking slightly. He'd just lost one of his oldest friends. He knew it, and there was nothing he could do about it. The show taping was scheduled at 6 o'clock. Studio audience filing in, cameras being positioned, the usual pre-show energy. But Dean couldn't focus. He kept thinking about Tommy, about the look on his face, about 20 years of friendship ending in a backstage hallway. His producer came to his dressing room 30 minutes before taping. "Dean, you okay?" "No," Dean said honestly, "but we've got a show to do." "Do you want to say anything about Tommy?" Dean thought about it. He could keep it quiet, let Tommy leave without making it public, protect his privacy, protect the friendship, or what was left of it. But Dean had learned something over the years. Secrets in this business didn't stay secret. If he didn't address it, rumors would spread, people would speculate. It would become a bigger story than it needed to be. And more than that, Dean felt like he owed it to the crew, to the audience, to himself, to be honest about what had happened. "Yeah," Dean said. "I'll say something." The show went smoothly. Dean performed like the professional he was. Jokes landed, songs were perfect. The audience had no idea anything was wrong. Then at the end of the show, after the final sketch, after the closing song, Dean stepped forward. The cameras were still rolling. The audience was applauding. Dean raised his hand. The applause died down. The audience sensed something was different. "Folks," Dean said, "before we go, I need to make an announcement. It's not an easy one." The studio went quiet. "My friend Tommy Rivers, who's been the head writer on this show since we started, is leaving, effective immediately." You could feel the shock ripple through the audience, through the crew. Tommy Rivers was a known name. People knew he and Dean were close. Dean continued, his voice steady but strained. "Tommy's been my friend for 20 years. He's one of the most talented writers I've ever worked with. But sometimes you have to choose between friendship and doing what's right. And I'm choosing what's right." He paused. His eyes were glistening, but he didn't cry. Professional to the end. "I wish Tommy nothing but the best. He knows where to find me if he needs me. But he can't work here anymore. And that's my decision. Mine alone." The audience didn't know how to react. There was scattered, uncertain applause. Some people just sat in shocked silence. Dean nodded to the cameras. "That's our show. Good night, everybody." The cameras cut. The lights stayed up for a moment as the crew reset. Dean walked off stage without looking at anyone, went straight to his dressing room and closed the door. He sat there for an hour, alone. People knocked, but he didn't answer. Finally, he went home. Jean was waiting up for him. She said, "I heard." Dean nodded, sat down heavily on the couch. "I fired Tommy, on the air, in front of everyone." "Why on the air?" "Because if I did it privately, he'd think I was ashamed, like I was hiding it. This way, he knows I'm not ashamed of the decision, just sad about it." Jean sat next to him. "Do you think he'll understand?" "No," Dean said quietly. "I think he'll hate me for it, and I think he has every right to." Dean tried calling Tommy the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. The calls went unanswered. He sent letters. They weren't returned, but they weren't answered either. Dean heard through mutual friends that Tommy had left Los Angeles, gone to New York, was trying to get work there.
Dean sent word that if Tommy needed a recommendation, a reference, anything, Dean would provide it. No response.
Months passed. The show continued without Tommy. They hired a new head writer. The quality improved. The ratings stayed strong. Professionally, Dean had made the right call. But personally, he was devastated. "I see him everywhere," Dean told Sammy Davis Jr. one night. "I'll be working on a sketch and think Tommy would love this. Or I'll hear a joke and want to call him. But I can't, because I destroyed our friendship to save my show." "You did what you had to do," Sammy said. "Did I?" asked Dean. "Or did I just prove that I care more about success than I do about people?" "Dean, you tried to help him for months. You did everything you could. He wasn't helping himself. You can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm." "I know," Dean said, "but that doesn't make it hurt less." Years passed. Dean and Tommy never reconciled. Tommy got sober eventually, Dean heard through the grapevine, and found work writing for other shows. He did okay. Not great, but okay. Dean would ask mutual friends about him sometimes. Is he happy? Is he healthy? The answers were usually vague. Tommy didn't like talking about Dean, didn't want to discuss what had happened. In 1987, Dean's son died in a plane crash. It destroyed Dean. He barely performed after that, lost interest in everything. At the funeral, Dean was surrounded by friends. Frank, Sammy, Shirley MacLamaine, Bob Newhart, all the people who'd been part of his life, his career, his journey. And standing in the back, almost hidden, was Tommy Rivers. Dean didn't see him during the service, but afterward, at the reception, someone told him Tommy had been there. Dean looked around, but Tommy was already gone. Dean Martin died in 1995. The funeral was massive. Every major name in Hollywood attended. A celebration of a legendary career, a life well lived. And in the back row, mostly unnoticed, sat Tommy Rivers. After the service, a reporter, doing a piece on Dean's legacy, approached Tommy, asked him about working with Dean, about their friendship. Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Dean fired me in 1968, on his show, in front of an audience and cameras. It was the most humiliating moment of my life." The reporter waited. "But I understand why he did it. I was destroying myself, and I was bringing him down with me. He tried to help me, tried to protect me, and I kept failing him. So he made the hard choice. He chose his show, his crew, his career over our friendship. And he was right to do it." "Did you ever forgive him?" Tommy looked at the casket being carried out. "I understood him," he said quietly. "But I never forgave him. And he knew that. That's why he kept trying to reach out over the years. Why he'd send messages through friends. He wanted absolution, and I couldn't give it to him. Maybe that makes me a bad person, but that's the truth." "Do you regret that now?" "Every day," Tommy said. His voice cracked slightly. "Because Dean was right about everything. I was the one who was wrong, and I spent 30 years punishing him for doing what needed to be done. And now he's gone, and I can't tell him I'm sorry. I can't tell him I finally understand. I can't tell him that losing his friendship was the wake-up call I needed to get sober and turn my life around." Tommy wiped his eyes. "Dean Martin fired me to save his show. But in doing it, he saved my life. I just wish I'd told him that while he was still alive." The story of Dean Martin firing Tommy Rivers on live television became one of those moments that defined Dean's character in complicated ways. It showed he could be ruthless when necessary, professional, willing to make hard choices. But it also showed the cost of those choices. Dean never fully recovered from that decision, never stopped feeling guilty about it, never stopped wondering if there was another way he could have handled it. The truth is, there probably wasn't. Tommy needed to hit rock bottom, and Dean couldn't stop that from happening while also enabling him. The kindest thing Dean could do was let Tommy fall, even if it meant losing a friend.
But knowing you did the right thing doesn't make it hurt less. And Dean hurt over Tommy for the rest of his life. Sometimes you have to choose between friendship and doing what's right. Dean chose what was right, and it destroyed him anyway. That's the real story of the night Dean Martin fired his best friend on live television. Not a story about betrayal, but a story about the impossible choices we sometimes have to make. About how doing the right thing can still break your heart. About how you can lose someone by trying to save them. Dean Martin was a lot of things: a singer, a comedian, an icon. But more than anything, he was human. And that night, his humanity showed in the worst possible way. He made the right choice, and he paid for it for the rest of his life.